All right. Welcome to chapter 2 of the Media 143 class. This is chapter 2, the Internet, Digital Media, and Media Convergence. So we'll try to get through this one today and give you another, hopefully help you a little bit when you're going through the chapters. So let me get this to work. First thing we're going to talk about is a little bit about digital media and convergence and how it's really changed in terms of the today's society. The idea that the emergence of the internet really was a mass medium that allowed an array of media to converge in one space and easily be shared. So we know that through our different means of getting internet to us, which is again tablets, phones, TV, internet, the whole 9 yards, has made a huge difference in terms of how society has changed. And social media, this whole idea of social media and the premise that fear of missing out, because social media is so dominant and prominent today that many people experience the fear of missing out. And there are studies that indicate more time on social media may actually lead to decreased happiness. And again, the jury's out on that. You can make that argument if you really wanted to. I don't know what data sets they used, but again, that's something to consider at this point. So how did the internet begin? The birth of the internet originally started with a military communications network that allowed two-way communication and one-dimensional communication. By 2000, multimedia source for both information and entertainment. So by the beginning of the 2000s, that's when we really started to, the technology really took off. ARPANET was the inception of the internet. It was created by the Department of Defense to enable researchers to share their computer processing time. Also, they knew that email improved communication. Each computer hub has similar status and power, and there's no master switch to actually set it down. So here's an example of some distributed networks. And again, a lot of this is the same way that telephone networks are, cell phones work. And again, the early internet was based on a lot of the things that we had in terms of creation of the cell phones too, in terms of how we link them. So we'd have like a centralized network, a decentralized network, and a distributed network. And all those were part and parcel of how we got to the place we are today. So the net really got bigger. The entrepreneurial stages really were the early 70s, 1980s. Microprocessors changed that by, again, developing miniature circuits that process and store electronic signals. It signals the net markability. It allowed for the first personal computer, which was one of the things that before I went back to Miami in 1987, I got my first computer that was a PC that was about $3,000. And I thought it was something that was going to last 15 or 20 years. And it, believe me, it did not last. It was out of date by after about 3 or 4 years, or 3 years maybe. But and that showed how quickly the technology was really changing at that point. The other thing that made a big difference was fiber optic cable. Again, it was thinner, faster cables made commercial use of computers more viable, transmitting information and data along fiber optics as opposed to copper, which was much slower. So this became the standard for transmitting communication data rapidly. Miami actually has a fiber web that goes between Oxford, Hamilton, and Middletown, something that was developed in the 2000s, late 1990s, 2000 in Butler County. So the idea was that we would have super fast internet that we could use commercially, and it's still being used today. So how did we really get to the point where we had browsers? Again, World Wide Web was initially a text data linking system, mostly used for email file transfers and remote access of databases. It was developed by Tim Berners-Lee at CERN in the late 1980s. The other thing that was really created was the HTML, hypertext markup language, was the written code that creates web pages and links. And I got into this on the ground floor when I was at Wright State in the 90s. And one of our projects was with a company that we had to write a safety manual, or more or less the user's guide for a manual that they were using in hypertext language. So I got to do a little bit of coding doing that. And the idea was it allows computers to communicate. And again, we're still, the basis that we had in the 90s is still based the same kind of code that we have today, only obviously much easier to use. The browsers, the software packages that help users navigate the web, brought the web to mass audiences in 1993. I remember Netscape. That was the first one I ever used. And it sort of went by the wayside eventually when the big players came about. So how did the users link through telephone and cable wires? And initially we did have dial-up, which was terrible. And believe me, you don't want to go back to that, because even Miami, we had connections where we had to almost have a dedicated phone line at home just to run the computer off of. Broadband changed this with connections that can quickly download multimedia content. And again, they've replaced all the dial-up ISPs, and it was very, very clunky and slow. So again, the major players involved, the internet service providers, AT&T, Comcast, and Verizon, Spectrum, Cox, those are all the main players in terms of who actually owns the internet companies that we do use daily. So people did really embrace the digital communication, and I think you could call this the era right now that we're in. That again, digital communication involves image, text, sound converted into electronic symbols, which are transported and reassembled in a precise reproduction. Includes email and instant messaging. One of the things that I can really sort of comment on is, in high school I was a photographer, and we had to actually take the pictures, develop the pictures, print the pictures, and then have them screened somehow to put into our newspaper we made. Whereas today, you can take a Nikon camera or Canon or whatever you have, and it's connected to the internet, and you can instantly send an image to say it was a news media of some sort. It's instantaneous in terms of your image, so you're actually on the web sending things back and forth, and you can post on social media, whatever you want, instantly. And that really is a huge change from my era for sure. I mean, it's fantastic in that sense. So this also includes email and instant messaging. That was the other thing that's really, I think texting was a big issue when that came about too. Email to a certain extent now, I think, isn't at the forefront where it was when it first came out, but it's still obviously used. We use it in our daily communication all the time. Search engines were really organizing the web, and again, how they came about. Again, the first one I remember is Netscape. Their automated route to find content on the internet, they're built on mathematical algorithms rather than manually entered data. A lot of libraries had similar Boolean search engines that you could use prior to some of the search engines that came out today, and they were sort of clunky, sort of hard to use. You had to put in more fields in that. But now, basically, all research and a lot of research is people go to Google first, and their success was due to that algorithm based on pages' popularity. We can also argue, too, that since it is a business and they're making money off it, then marketers try to guarantee that they can come in the first 5 to 10 pages of search. And how do you get your product or company or entity to the top of the list? And it's based on this algorithm. And that's a huge issue in terms of marketing and how to convey messages to people, because a lot of people today do not go much beyond 4 or 5 pages deep when they're doing research. And it's one of the things that we really focus on at Miami is even when you're using our search engines that are related to academia, the idea is you don't just go for the first one you see on the first page. And that happened a lot. So the web did go social. It went from a read-only culture to an internet read-write culture, which made a big difference once we had some of the social media such as Instagram, Facebook, whatever, Twitter. Encourage the users to create content and interact with other people. We could argue in a essay question whether that's good or bad, or whichever way we want to go on it. But for the most part, I'm still leaning towards good. But the jury is still out in terms of how we go in the next decade here. Types of social media would be blogs, Twitter, which we're very familiar with, collaborative projects, wiki websites. We have used that at Miami in the past, not so much today. Some people do. Content communities of YouTube, which again, we're actually putting this lesson on that format, which is interesting. The social networking sites, Facebook, again, Instagram, TikTok would be thrown in there because I think that's a battle right now in terms of the argument of whether TikTok's good or bad, depending on what your political persuasion is. Virtual games of worlds, World of Warcraft, all that kind of thing, I guess, Call of Duty. Virtual social worlds. And again, I don't do much gaming, so I really am not as familiar with the gaming scene, but obviously it's a huge impact in terms of social media. So how is social media, connected to democracy? How do we do this? And has it really made a big difference? And really, is it a tool for democracy that sort of undermines repressive regimes? We could talk about the Arab Spring protests, the Occupy Wall Street. China's had mass communication exposure outside. If you look at what's happened in Hong Kong and some of the issues related to that. even the things we've had with Black Lives Matters, with some of the other issues that are going on in the country right now. Social media is changing the world in the sense that, particularly because everything is filmed now, and you can't escape without a camera being around, is what essentially it boils down to at this point. And you could look at that two ways. You know, it definitely can be, you know, an argument back and forth on it. I think a lot of people argue for transparency, that we do want to see what's going on, not be hide behind a rock and not get any information. So convergence also has gone on to the mobile media, that obviously the content is merged to different mass media. You get your your iPad, your phone, your computer, all these means of actually using mobile media. So it's become a hub for creation, distribution, and presentation. We know that. And TikTok is my main example right now because it's really the hottest thing going at this point. But I'm sure in another year we'll have something else that might be hotter. You never know. You know, what is the next step in terms of mobile media is what we really want to know. So the convergence, again, on our PCs, we know this, how we can actually use, we can access movies, Netflix, Hulu, again, Apple TV, any of the downloadable streaming formats we can use. Again, iTunes and Spotify, or the music, would be good examples of that. Pandora also would fit in there. Books would be Amazon and Google, and then games and newspapers and magazines. Skype and iChat, FaceTime, can that replace telephones? I know the argument's still out on that too. But obviously people do use those methods. Right now with the situation we're in, Zoom has become like super popular across the whole country because of going to mobile meetings. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that actually as we move along down the stream here in terms of media creation and what the future is going to be. So the other examples could be how it's gone onto our TVs, would be the internet-ready TVs, the Rokus, all those kind of TVs that most people have. Again, the video game consoles such as Xbox, Wii, and PS4, you can obviously get onto those for content too. The set-top boxes, Apple TV, Google Chromecast, and Roku. So all this leads to multiple avenues for how we access media content. And we're also inundated. I have so many channels now that half the time I don't even know what I want to watch or what to find, kind of thing, because you have Amazon Prime, you have the, you know, the Apple TV, the Disney, all these things give us so many opportunities. And again, we do end up to a certain extent maybe paying a little bit more too if we want the streaming channels. And it also means an opportunity that we could eventually change and cut cable because we have so many streaming options at this point, and a lot of people have considered that. So. The other mobile devices that propel this convergence method is the smartphones and tablets. So we can text, we can listen to music, watch movies, reading books and magazines, connecting to the internet, playing games. All these things can be used obviously on your iPad or your Samsung tablet or whatever. And even applications for educational use. A lot of people do use tablets for school. And it's easy, portable. You know, the whole idea is that you can actually hold your hand and get what information you really need. So this impact of media convergence in the mobile media, the consumption, it really is mobile and flexible. So it is changing, it's kind of morphing almost daily to a certain extent. And this merging the media onto one device blurs the distinctions between what used to be separate media. So since they're all morphing and they're changing, it's experiencing multiple manners simultaneously, because I think of Twitter as a platform being quoted all the time. I think of TikTok. All those are sort of interweaving in our daily lives in terms of what we use. And again, you can make the argument back and forth. Is this a good thing or is this a bad thing? Do we have too much screen time? Are we not experiencing what we should be experiencing because of the amount of social media that we get hooked into watching? That's a good question. So the relationship with the internet has changed. Again, the noteworthy trends are really Apple, iPhones, iPads, and iPods make 5 times more than computers in terms of what they make on them. So that's surprising, but it, you know, pretty much that's how they make money. And Facebook users are still increasing, which you would think that it was more gearing towards more older people at this point. But, and some of the younger users would be going to Instagram and maybe, you know, Twitter, some of those things instead. But again, surprisingly, you know, obviously Facebook is still the leader, and again, they have a lot of money to do it. There's no question about it. So the apps and social media sites offer closed internet walled garden. You could put it in some sort of metaphoric term like that if you want to. But again, we do end up a little bit in silos in terms of the content that we gravitate for too, which is another issue in itself. of what people seek, and the algorithms that Facebook have, the algorithms that they have in Google, all those things are players in terms of how we get communication. And again, do we need gatekeepers like that? That's another issue in itself. You know, should we change should there be some sort of restrictions in terms of internet and what's on internet, what's not? That's a big issue right now in society. We've been arguing over that. So the economics and media of the internet, what really changed was Telecommunications Act of 1996. This is a good one to remember for an exam. It overhauled the nation's communications regulations, and you could argue back and forth that it did some good things but some bad things, but it really did change how the internet functions and how media functions to a certain extent. So Apple established the new media economics. They provided a market for iTunes in exchange for 30% cut of the revenue. That was a huge issue for the music industry. It really did change the music industry, which we'll get into when we do the chapter on music. And it pretty much changed the world in terms of how the artists make money too. That's the other thing basically that followed it. So Amazon went down the same road, creating the Kindle and selling ebooks for a cut of the revenue. And again, most people do originally think of Amazon with books, but now they've morphed into everything else and the kitchen sink to a certain extent, because Amazon Prime, they make their own movies, they make their own, have their own streaming music. Everything now is between Amazon, Apple, Google are the biggest players in the game in terms of that, and Facebook. So the next era could be the semantic web, where there's places basic information in the web in meaningful categories. That might happen. We'll see how that comes about. Obviously, Siri has been a huge factor in terms of using voice recognition to answer questions, find locations, and interact with the iPhone. Obviously, Alexa, Samsung got theirs too. You know, they all have some sort of verbal command system that you can actually find. I think that's the other direction we're going to head, hopefully, in the future. That, I don't know, maybe it could end up being holograms. I don't know how we do it, but teaching could end up being basically provided through a hologram or through just asking questions to the web type of thing. We don't know. I mean, it could happen. So the ownership, the controlling of the internet is connected to these three issues. Again, security of personal private information, which is another main argument today. The appropriateness of online materials, and then the accessibility and openness of the internet. And I think one of the arguments that we had on Facebook, again, it was obviously the QAnon, some of the other, I don't even know if you want to call them entities, that may be spewing information that's false. In other words, is it freedom of speech to do that? And you can make that argument back and forth too, of what if you put out false information? Is it propaganda? Is it just false information that's being put out there, and again, that leave it up for the audience to decide or not. And I think we're in the middle of that battle right now. That's not going to change for a little bit, because we're definitely in the midst of that. Who controls the internet and who controls the content on the internet? So the companies dominating the internet by the end of the 90s, which I remember, was Yahoo, Microsoft, AOL, and Google. And again, the companies today in the converged world are Google, Microsoft, Facebook, Amazon, and Apple. And I remember when AOL was a big player. Everybody thought they were going to make huge money like Apple or Yahoo and those, and they did not make the cut in terms of the transition to the convergence. So it was interesting to see that companies that people thought was going to be a good player definitely didn't come about. So this targeted advertising and data mining, this is something that I think a lot of people are afraid of, in the sense that should advertising, which is part of social networking sites, and we've all had this, where we look up something on our phone and the next thing you know, it's on our computer, or we talk about something and the next thing you know, all of a sudden you always talk about flowers and there's flowers pop up on your screen in terms of an advertisement. That's something that almost seems intrusive, but it is part of the technology today. And again, this data mining that goes with it, it gathers your location and purchasing habits, which I think they'd be pretty bored if they gathered my location and my habits, because I don't do much. E-commerce, the buying and selling of products on the services on the internet, and again, the cookies, which we can control, are profiles that are automatically collected and transferred between servers. So you can obviously opt out if you want to, or say, I don't want to have cookies following type of thing. But again, with all the hacking and some of the other things going on, I think it's very difficult to actually confirm that. Spyware is the information gathering software that's secretly bundled with free download software. So you have to be very careful on that kind of thing, that they'll end up trying to get information. And again, these opt-in, opt-out policies, where they require websites to get permission from the consumers before collecting browsing history data. And again, you can opt out too, would be the other way. And that's the other thing, that's the automatic thing of it is, do we really want to be somebody to know all our personal things and where we buy and whatever type of thing? That's definitely a national issue on debate on that one. So do we really want that? And I think the same thing goes on even when you're shopping in stores, some of these loyalty cards like Kroger's and some of the other ones, that they want to know exactly what you buy, and then they can target the ads or the coupons to you. And I mean, if it's your permission because you have the card, that's one thing, but in some ways it makes you wonder if it's an invasion of privacy or not. But now that we have stores doing more of the click list stuff and the other type of thing, I think that's going to get even more evident that they want the information on what kind of things you buy. So what can you do to keep your personal information private? When you use the internet, you can give away the personal information. The government surveillance of online activity is allowed by the Patriot Act. So that was a big change that happened after 9/11. And again, in 2012, 7% of Americans were a victim of identity theft, and that's over 24.7 billion in losses. Everybody probably has been hacked at one point, or you get a strange purchase on your credit cards. I've had it in the past few months. And you still, it can be from gas stations, it can be skimmers, it can be anywhere. They can actually do it with the phone. So you do have to watch out on that kind of thing. And again, I don't think that's going to go away either. Phishing would be the phony email messages that appear from the official website asking customers to update their credit card numbers, account passwords, other personal information. I think most of us know you just don't do that. You have to be very careful in terms of what type of information you put out, particularly related to any money accounts that you have where they can actually get the data and use it. It does happen, so we have to be very careful in terms of that. I hope security improves with a lot of the encryption that we have, but again, it always seems like any encryption that can be broken at a certain point. So what's appropriate, again, online? Should we have any type of restrictions in terms of content? So banning particular sections of the internet, that's a good question. The Children's Internet Protection Act 2003 was the idea that schools and libraries should use filtering software to limit minors' exposure to inappropriate content. And again, the counter argument is many people want it to be like the Wild West and completely unregulated. So you can go back and forth on that one. And again, I think obviously in K through 12, they can obviously use that because of students and children being exposed. But I don't know what the answer is when somebody's an adult, if they, what they want to watch or what they don't want to watch, should that be privy to some sort of restriction? And again, we bounced this ball around several times trying to decide, what is appropriate and what's not appropriate. And we can make a list of those things that should not be on the net, as we know. And we'll go into that later. So access is the other big issue and right now this is extremely crucial because the idea that some people don't have access, so there is sort of this digital divide that they don't have the information, and you could put it into information haves and information have not, because if you don't have access to internet, you don't have a smartphone, you don't have access, in education in terms of being able to use information off the web, it's a giant thing in terms of careers. All these things sort of morph into that. Smartphones have made a big help in terms of narrowing that gap because obviously you do some things on phone now that you couldn't do years ago, so you can still look up things and go through that. But there's a gap in the United States and the rest of the world, and again, some governments permit limited to zero access to the internet. I think China has always been an example of that in terms of not, you have to get into a VPN to actually get outside access to the web. And there are other countries that can actually, turn off the web when there's some sort of social crisis or an upheaval in the country. Then they cut out the internet is one of the first things because they don't get information getting out. And that's another thing that seems sort of like a restrictive thing. We've seen that in Hong Kong a little bit. We've seen that in some of the other countries that have had problems. I think in Belarus recently, that same kind of issue happened where the government either fell and then they tried to restrict access to the outside. And that's an interesting thing itself that we have to figure out, how do we regulate? And again, each country is doing their own regulations in terms of that. There is no worldwide standard, which should be, but apparently I don't know if we're ever going to get to that stage. So the net neutrality idea was the idea of maintaining an open internet, the idea that every website and every user has the right to the same internet network speed and access. However, the ones that don't want it to be neutral, the big companies, they want to profit by offering higher, faster connections and priority for people who pay more. So this wasn't really a legal formal policy until about 2015. So it comes down to the money-making issue part of it. And again, I'm all for, everybody should have equal access, is still my opinion. I don't think we should have to pay for more. Even the speeds, they will try to throttle down speeds if you're paying less compared to the person who pays more. So that's an issue in itself. That's one reason it's nice to have your internet through, Miami, some of the other places, university, that you do have a given amount of speed that you don't have to worry about that, or if you're paying for it, like I pay for Spectrum, to get a fast speed. But this is still an issue that I think is going to continue in the next 10 years too. It's going to have more fighting over that as people want to make money off the web. Some of the alternative voices on the internet would be open source software. They openly share ideas and source codes. It was developed by independent programmers. Firefox is a good example that it was used. They try to get you to donate money because they develop it, but they want Firefox to be free. Most of the browsers you don't have to pay anything for to download them, but again, they still would end up, like the Microsoft operating systems and that, you still end up in the end buying products related to their products. So you look at it two ways. Digital archiving, the aims to provide all citizens with universal access to more than 85 billion archived web pages. That's an interesting concept. I think that's going to happen even to the extreme in the next 10 years too. If we try to look out into the future, we're going to see obviously higher speeds. We're going to see more access to information that we can get at our fingertips pretty quickly. So the internet and democracy, this is a sort of an essay type of question. Should it be commercialism? Should it be commercialized in terms of, is it a threat? Commercial aspects of the internet could be the biggest threat to the internet's democratic potential. In other words, people who want to make money off it and how they can do it, how they can control it. The internet's potential for widespread use by all could be partially preempted by narrow commercial interests too, that they want to try to, get it into a small segment that they can control in terms of the commerce and the commercial aspect of it. I don't know. Again, this is something that we could argue about, and I wish I was in class because we could, sort of get a discussion going on this type of thing. But you have to think about this in the future and try to think of what it's going to be like for you in 20 years from now. So the other question would be, inexpensive digital production, social media distribution allows greater participation than any traditional medium. Is that true? In other words, can we put on Facebook, put on Twitter, whatever? This really is anybody can participate type of thing. But we may just be communicating with those who already share the same feelings and opinions. So we're sort of in these little silos, which is another thing in itself, that usually people will tune out the messages that they don't want any part of, the cognitive dissonance type of theory that we get into, that you just want to stay in your own silo and not move on to others. So that's another thing that's going to be pretty crazy in the next 10 years too. I think how we change this, and should it be changed? And again, is it going to morph into something different? Are we going to have a new medium that enters the internet similar to what Twitter did, similar to TikTok, all those? There will be something that will be created that's going to be, wow, everybody's going to be using it. So we'll see how that all pans out. So that's the end of that chapter. I probably will make a video of the assignment for the oral history. I'll do that, and we'll go ahead and I'll put that one up too, but I'll go ahead and put this one up today.